Hola, bon dia. En aquesta entrevista parlarem amb Alistair Currie, que ens presentarà l'organització Population Matters. En aquesta entrevista també analitzarem el problema de la població i quin tipus de solucions proposa Population Matters i promou per a poder reduir el nombre de població. A més, veurem que tota proposta que fan sempre respecta els drets humans i sempre busquen promoure el poder de decisió, especialment de les dones, per a que puguin decidir tenir menys fills. Alistair Currie és cap de campanyes i de comunicacions de l'organització Population Matters i ha estat fent campanyes professionalment durant 20 anys. Es va unir a Population Matters el 2016. I Population Matters és una organització amb seu al Regne Unit que treballa globalment per aconseguir un millor futur per a la gent i pel planeta. Fan campanyes, informen i realitzen recerques per a obrir un debat constructiu sobre la població. Espero que l'entrevista sigui de profit i us animo a mirar les altres entrevistes que hem fet a diferents experts en la matèria que us poden ser d'interès. Us deixo amb l'entrevista. Thank you, Alistair Currie, for the opportunity to interview you and as a part of the Population Matters organization. The first question will be, what is Population Matters?
Population Matters is a UK-based charity that campaigns to achieve a sustainable global population through ethical means to improve people's lives and protect the planet. So we've been working for the last 30 years to promote the message that people having smaller families, which helps to reduce population, is going to help prevent many of our environmental problems and will also improve a number of human problems as well.
Perfect. The second question will be, why should we focus on limiting population when considering the environmental problem?
Well, first of all, I'd say we shouldn't focus on population. There are many drivers of our environmental problems, and population is just one. Population Matters exists as an organization because we don't feel that the element of population is being talked about enough, that a lot of the big environmental groups aren't really talking about it. It's not very much featuring in terms of the policy solutions that are being talked about in things like the climate change COP or elsewhere. So we want to draw attention to the very strong evidence of the contribution of population to our problems and highlight the solutions, which are all positive solutions, which I'm sure we can talk about. So that's our particular role. But we're in an environmental crisis. There are many drivers of it. Critical one, obviously, is overconsumption, particularly in the global north, where we consume far more than our fair share and produce far more than our fair share of emissions. So, all the gamut of things that I think everyone engaged in environmental issues is aware of, things like our diets, fossil fuel use, imbalance and inequity in our economic systems, all those things need to be addressed as well, but population should be addressed too. And just to explain as well, being concerned about population doesn't mean that our program is about limiting population in the sense of controlling population. It's about taking the steps that bring about population kind of limiting itself, if you like, that helps. At the moment, our population is going up, but there are things we can do that will make that plateau and come down sooner rather than later. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, perfect. Another question will be about these methods or measures we could do to reduce the population. But the question I wanted to ask now is, in the past, there were other predictions of a possible overpopulation, and they were wrong. The population increased, and there was no hunger or any other problems. Why shouldn't we embrace this prediction now?
Well, I think there were some very specific predictions made in the past about the consequences of overpopulation that proved to be wrong. So, for instance, on the issue of hunger, when those predictions were made, there wasn't awareness of the green revolution and some of the advances that we've made technologically and which have allowed us to feed people since then. But what has happened is we are in a situation in which the Earth is using 1.7 Earths of reusable resources just now. We're in a situation in which we're going to be incredibly lucky to prevent our global temperatures rising by more than 1.5 degrees. Well, not lucky, we're going to have to take radical action in order to avoid that. We're in a situation where we're in the sixth mass extinction of biodiversity just now, where the rates of biodiversity loss are estimated to be 1,000 times what they would be without human intervention. So we're in an environmental crisis. Some of the resource issues that were originally talked about, and particularly food issues in the, in the past about population may not have transpired, but there is no question, I don't think anyone argues, that we're in an environmental crisis just now, and population has been one of the factors that's contributed to that. And there's plentiful scientific evidence, particularly on biodiversity, also on climate change, and across lots of different areas, that population is one of the contributors. So it's not in fact that things have been proved wrong, it's that some of the individual details of that have been proved wrong. But I think the question we're in now is not to look in the past, it's to say, where are we now? What can we do about it? The question isn't what's happened in the past. The question is, where are we now, and what can we do about it? And I was just looking the other day, in Greta Thunberg's lifetime, more than 1 billion people have been added to the planet. Not 1 billion have been born, but there's 1 billion more people alive now than there were. That's how rapid at the moment population growth is. And it's very clear, I think, to everyone that that's got to make an impact on our environmental situation. So here's where we are. Let's look at the many solutions that are available, and let's recognize this as being amongst them.
Thank you for your answer. Yeah, the next question would be, who has this responsibility when we talk about limiting or reducing the population number? Is it a state thing, or an individual thing, or an international organizations thing?
As with many of these things, it's everyone's, but I think, but the balance of responsibility is different in different places. Where we have, generally speaking, freedom of choice about our reproductive choices. So where we've got sufficient economic independence, where we've got access to family planning and we're free to use it, then as individuals, we should be thinking about our family size. We should be asking, is the amount of kids that I want to have, or that I do have, is that a way I can think about making a contribution to solving our environmental problems? In the same way that many people these days would be thinking about what they eat, or how they travel, or all these kind of sort of lifestyle issues. So there's very much a role for individuals in this, but of course not everyone is in that situation of being free to make a choice, whether it's because they can't access contraception, or because as happens in many places, there are women are not empowered, so they don't have the freedom to make free choices about that, or they don't have the opportunities that are better for them than being married early and having children early. There's a whole raft of structural things which drive high population growth. Poverty is amongst them. So as a society, as an international community, and in particular the wealthier countries, who've often contributed to those problems that the poorer countries are suffering from, we have a responsibility to address those. So for instance, an obvious example is through international aid, through supporting family planning, girls' empowerment, poverty alleviation. All those things will help to address this problem, as well as making people's lives better. And those of us who are in, those of us who are in privileged position, and in particular our governments, should be stepping up to that responsibility.
Thank you. Yeah, it also seems that having 1 children in a rich country is something different from having one in a poor country, because also all the emissions that children will live in one country will be very different from another.
Absolutely. The average American will produce more than 40 times the amount of emissions of someone from, say, Nigeria, and there's plenty of countries with lower emissions than Nigeria. So the positive impact of choosing to have fewer children in a rich country is far higher than in a poor country. We shouldn't forget that poverty also leads to environmental problems. It's not a major contributor towards climate change, but for instance, poor people who have little option might be cutting down forests because they need the firewood, or because they need to graze. So it's not just affluence that drives problems, but again, that's a reason for getting people out of poverty and working in those areas. But yes, absolutely, the biggest immediate benefit from those choices is in rich countries, and it's which is also where we, generally speaking, have the freedom of choice, where we actually can make that choice.
Yeah, thank you, very interesting. The next question is Population Matters defends that parents should choose smaller families. But why do you defend this position and not that we should have at most one child, or maybe two, or maybe that we should not have any child? Why have you embraced this idea?
I think it's very difficult. I think our job is to say to people, it's better this way, not to tell people what they should do, but to provide them with the information and say, you look at this situation and it's going to help. I think the issue of family size is very, very personal. And I think if you set a number on that, then people will feel, for a start, people who've got more than two children or more than one child might feel alienated by that. I think our message is, by and large in the developed world, most people have around about two children. That's, I mean, right now fertility rates are actually lower than that. Most people have around about that area. So if you're asking people to think about having smaller families, the reality is that in most cases, what that will result in is not one or two children. Certainly we don't say have no children. What we do say is that for many people, that is the right choice for them. And it's a choice, a positive choice that actually, I'm a father, it helps my child when someone else chooses not to have children, because it's his future. It's he who's going to have to deal with climate change and biodiversity loss and all those other things. So it's a very positive choice that should be recognized and celebrated, and certainly never described as selfish or whatever. But, that's an individual's choice. People should be free to make that choice. And people should also be free to choose to have a large family if they want. It's a fundamental human right how large your family is. We believe it's much better if they choose smaller, but we have to recognize that it is people's right to make that choice.
Thank you. Very interesting. The next question is about the idea of limiting population, that it is usually something problematic. It is commonly accepted that it is not moral to limit population by killing anyone. But to limit fertility during history, there have been terrible acts against human rights, especially against women, justified by the need of avoiding overpopulation. So starting from forced castration till the one-child policy in China, for example. So what is the difference between these methods to reduce population and the ones Population Matters defend?
Well, to be clear, as with any problem that we're trying to solve, the fundamental basis of it is you don't solve it by abusing human rights. And the things that took place in China, India, Puerto Rico, and sadly the list is very, very long, of places where human rights were abused in order to address population. It's clearly wrong, and we have to start from that fundamental principle. The thing is that if you talk about population policies, people think of China. What they don't think of is Bangladesh or Thailand or Costa Rica or places like that, which have introduced positive, progressive policies which do the things that we know bring down family size, and they are tackle poverty where you can, improve the quality of education, particularly empower women and girls, often through education, give them autonomy. Modern family planning, absolutely essential. It doesn't matter what else you do if people don't have access to effective modern family planning, they're not going to be able to make choices about their family size. And then the fifth element of that is about advising people about the benefits of smaller families. And there are, culturally across the world, there is desired family size. It's larger in some places, it's smaller in other places, but many positive population policies have looked at saying, well, is this, what is that, the ideal number of children? So, the recipe is a positive recipe. And as I say, no one's heard of Bangladesh. Bangladesh, which remains a very poor country, has made a huge cut in its fertility rate, in its family size over just the last 30 years or so. No one's heard of it. No one's celebrating it. People are thinking about China, and of course they're right. And that's why there is a great deal of concern and doubt and worry about when you talk about population. But it's actually not about what took place 30 or 40 years ago. It's where are we now? And again, what are the solutions? If the solutions are positive solutions which improve people's lives anyway, we should be taking people out of poverty. We should be addressing We should be empowering women. We should be making sure everyone has access to family planning. Those are all things that we're not doing well enough at the moment. Let's do more of those things.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, very interesting. So in some sense, just to clarify my ideas, is that we need to give human rights, basic human rights to the poor group countries, but at the same time, we should try to convince them that having smaller families is something good, is something valuable.
I think, you know, in many poorer countries that is already recognized. You know, there are plenty of countries which have population policies which are designed to address that problem. And you know, our experience in population matters is actually people from poorer countries and in the global south are often actually much more willing to talk about population as an issue than people are in the global north. You know, which, I mean, that's a generalization. Clearly, you know, there are people that, you know, have concerns about it everywhere. So I don't think it's about, right now, it's not about us telling people in Niger, say, where you know, average family size is almost 7, they should have fewer kids. It's about addressing the circumstances that lead to people in Niger having those, which are poverty, which are all the other kind of things that we've spoken about. That's our first job. Let's worry about you know, about the other problems after that. As we talked about, started off talking about, in places where we have those, you know, the luxury of choice, if you like, then yes, thinking about that choice is the stage that we're at in thinking about addressing this problem.
Yeah, and the last question I wanted to ask is related to this question. So once we provided basic human rights and education, health system, we also think that there must be a cultural change in some sense. So, for example, in the last poll that you made in Population Matters in the UK, it said that a quarter of people between the age of 18 to 34 years old, they don't want to have children or want to have less children because of the environmental problem.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a huge improvement from past years, but at the same time is a small percentage of the global population. And even in some rich countries, people is still negatively judged because of they don't having children. So do you think, in front of the urgency of the climate change, that we have time to realize these changes to solve the problem?
Well, I think when we look at climate change and our other urgent problems, we've just got to tackle that with all the tools at our disposal. And I think we also have to recognize, particularly when it comes to population, is that population effects, changes in family size, changes in fertility, they take a while to come through in terms of actual effects on population. So even if there were quite significant changes just now, they're not going to make much difference to carbon emissions within the next 10 years or so. Now, we still need to be worried about what carbon emissions are going to look like in 20 years or 30 years, but I think we have to be realistic that that's one of the population is absolutely not you know, any kind of panacea in that way. So you're right. I think that, you know, there are, as we said, there are cultural assumptions about family size absolutely everywhere. Some places it's smaller, at some places it's larger. But I mean, we definitely do see a shift. I've been working at Population Matters for nearly 5 years now, and the amount of media coverage and the amount of attention on the question of family size and the environment is far higher than it was. We just did this poll, as you said, it showed actually a third of 18 to 24-year-olds thinking about having smaller families. Now, that's not necessarily good news, because I think a lot of 18 to 24-year-olds are frightened about the future for their children, and that's obviously a tragedy that people should feel. They can't have, you know, have more children because of that kind of fear. But also in our poll, people also talked about having fewer children because they recognize the impact that having children might have. So you know, it's a conversation that's evolving very rapidly, as the environmental conversation is, and in particular amongst younger people. You know, there's far greater consciousness of it. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, you know, climate change being talked about 30 years ago, and it was this distant thing that that only a few people paid attention to, and was very abstract. And obviously, the circumstances have changed hugely. now, which is very positive, though it should have happened 30 years ago. That's what we wouldn't be in this situation now. So it's not a case of, obviously, it's not a case of either or. It is, yes, let's look at these things. And of course, just on an individual level, no one should face judgment for choosing to have no children or only one child. Our poll also found out that there is still a negative prejudice against only children. Most people think that being an only child isn't good. Most people think people who are parents of only children think that they are judged for making that choice. So it's not just the child free; it is just straying from that norm. So we shoid see that change, because no one should be judged, on the size of their family. But as I say, it's not one thing or the other. It's let's see those positive changes across the board.
Well, very thank you, Alistair Currie. And well, thanks to your organization for offering for this interview.
No problem. Yeah.